Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete another episode of our Rimworld Anomaly Sea Ice Challenge with the transhumanist Paragons of Pandroth. Now, the last episode certainly marked the end of a chapter for our colony. Not only did we finally break free of the Golden Cube, but we also selected Elpis as the leader of the Paragons of Pandroth after he remained the only one steadfast enough to not fall under the cube's influence. On the flip side, we are now harboring an increasingly unstable Nociosphere, but we can launch that at anything that shows up in the next 8 days to safely dispose of it, and through psychic rituals we have means to guarantee that it finds something to kill. Now, to begin today's episode, our colonists are still recovering a bit from the events of the last one. Vulek is still death resting, Ellie is still injured, but as her younger brother Elpis feeds Ellie a bedside meal, we make some research progress, as we have now finally unlocked advanced fabrication. As a result, we can now fabricate our own advanced components, and for a lot of the truly late-game tech that our transhumanists will eventually want to have, those are required. Speaking of technology, up next let us unlock growth bats. I'd imagine a transhumanist colony would of course also want to find ways to bypass the burdens of pregnancy, and well, we have 2 new couples in our ranks, so we might need these a little earlier than you might think. Apart from that, however, the episode's first day here remains largely uneventful, and so we already find ourselves on the second one, which begins with the arrival of a combat supplier. With her level 13 social skill, Ellie remains our best trader, and she is now going to purchase the Smooth Tail gene pack, allowing us to add tails to our people, and obviously not just for cosmetic reasons. Doing so actually also improves their manipulation stat by 5%. And I think that's very much in line for a colony that strives towards the ultimate form of self-improvement. There is also a gene pack here with awful arts that might be interesting just to acquire some negative traits, but the other 2 that are included are not really worth it. Super fast wound healing we already have, and ugly can actually be a bit of a problem. After all, we do not want our people to all detest each other. The next event then, right around the corner, it is one of those monument quests, and as intriguing as the rewards here may be, I just do not see us finish this. Simply because 3,000 blocks of stone might be a little tricky to acquire out on the sea ice. What is generally also pretty tricky to acquire out here is raw meat, which is why the appearance of a group of Arctic foxes here comes in handy, which we will of course immediately massacre. Back in the base, it is then time to accept a quest that we received last time around. We are asked to go raiding, and obviously will gladly accept, and since we can now make our own insanity lances, I think we'll go for the skill trainer here. From a transhumanist perspective, that strikes me as the most desirable reward. The bandit camp then, a good amount of distance away from our base, but then again drop pods should get us over there quickly. As Ellie then begins the process of turning Arctic foxes into chem fuel for those drop pods, we also finish the gestation process for our tunneler. So let's have Mechanitor Lauren activate our heaviest mechanoid to date. Very fittingly then, from the list of patron supporters in the naming rights tier and above, we will now name this one Mulch Butler. And I'd like to give a special shout out here to someone who has been supporting this channel for ages now. I had your name on the shortlist for a few weeks now, and seeing it come up was actually part of the decision to make a tunneler in the first place, so I'm very happy for you to finally join a series of mine. Now, regarding Mulch Butler's stats here, this is a heavy mining mech, also very capable on the front lines as a tank, but of course generally best suited to quickly mine out large veins of minerals. In the middle of the night then, it is time for Vulek to safely awaken from his death rest, and his first order of business will be to also free a mech himself. Our Agrihand Jerome was sadly killed in last episode's Shambler attack, but now Jerome is back, ready to plow the fields. Over the course of the rest of the night then, our new and improved prison continues to take shape, and on the next morning, once everyone's had their breakfast, it's time for Elpis to give his first speech as leader of the Paragons of Pandroth. His election was actually decided upon with Vulek not participating due to his death rest. I'd like to imagine though, with Vulek bestowing the gift of being a sanguiphage onto Elpis, that he does have some trust in the boy. Unfortunately though, Elpis's first speech is not exactly inspiring. But I suppose being a leader is something that you kind of need to grow into, and Elpis certainly does have a lot more growing still left to do. And so, maybe to take his mind off of unsuccessfully talking to his peers, Elpis will now talk to the Void again. It's time for another Void provocation all by himself. At this point, let me also briefly thank each and every one of you who purchased a shirt, a mug or a bag from the Live, Love, Provoke the Void collection featuring Gracie's design. I don't really make a whole lot of money from merch, but regardless, it means a lot to see you choose this way of supporting me. And once again, just as a side note, if shipping costs are too expensive for you, then you can always simply pledge to the Patreon merch tier and receive something that way. In some cases, that might be the cheaper option. Now, the Void provocation finishes without Elpis falling into a coma. We've seen that numerous times now. While we wait for the outcome, Volek then also finds some plasteel using the long-range mineral scanner. I made the switch to that after finding another component deposit last episode. Plasteel will most likely be another very important resource as we go for late-game technology. By the way, just in case you're wondering, I actually skipped this last episode, but we have received yet another pigskin distress signal. By now I know that this is always going to be a base overgrown by flesh, and I'm not sure whether or not this is really something we want to investigate for the third time in this series. But let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We still have a few days here to make a decision. For the moment, we have more pressing matters to attend to, as it seems like the Void provocation has finally worked again, as a pack of Chimeras has appeared. Only 15 of them, that's actually rather manageable, as Chimeras are in my opinion one of the more straightforward entities and do not present that much of a challenge to a sufficiently equipped colony. They are essentially vicious abominations resembling bears or other hulking animals. Rather fittingly, I think, discovering them unlocks the Juggernaut Serum, which allows its user to increase their strength and speed. And strength and speed, those are the Chimera's core qualities, as we now attempt to lure this group over to us. Once they appear on the map, they are actually not initially hostile, although that usually changes rather quickly. The Chimera's main unique ability then is its Rage, giving it a huge movement speed increase and making it immune to the effects of pain, and this ability is always triggered as soon as a Chimera takes damage. That means to take down a Chimera, you have to kill it, and it also means that capturing these entities can be surprisingly difficult, as for the most part they simply won't go down while they're still alive. Now, they can be stunned using a flare, but to be honest, fighting them in a choke point like this makes that hardly necessary. For the most part, you can treat them just like you would manhunting animals. There's really not too much that sets them apart. Nonetheless, we do want to capture one here just for the collection, and that is where Volek comes into play, who, after we've told our squad to briefly hold their fire, can now use these psychic shock lands, which is the easiest and most reliable way of obtaining a Chimera for studying. Ironically enough, we did actually have a second one go down all by itself. I assume the 1-hour timer on its rage simply ran out. Be that as it may, this way we are now able to haul 2 of them back into our containment cell. And that's actually a solid haul, considering that they are both advanced entities, and that they both produce 3.2 units of bioferrite per day. So 2 Chimeras already enough to fuel 1 bioferrite generator. Unfortunately though, the duo does not last long. The one that we targeted with the shock lance survives easily. The other one meanwhile sadly dies, just as Elpis is busy patching it up. I'm not exactly sure why, to be honest. After all, he is stopping the bleeding, so things should get better, but apparently it just wasn't enough. On the bright side, Chimeras can be butchered to vastly increase our supply of twisted meat and thus chem fuel, even though, and this is perhaps the last important bit to note about them, observing a Chimera bestows a -8 mood penalty on a colonist. This lasts for 24 hours, so a Chimera attack can have a noticeable impact on colony mood. The next threat is also right around the corner, although this one not quite as big. For what I believe to be the first time in this series, our deep drilling efforts have caused an infestation. I wasn't actually sure whether or not that's possible on the sea ice, but it seems it is, although the number of insects then eventually remains rather manageable. There's only 11 of them. On a 500% threat scale, I had expected a bit more. At the very least, this helps us take care of them in quick fashion, and so our meat supply continues to grow. After only a few short seconds of fighting, only a few last stragglers remain, and so, except for our ghoul Midnight, we escaped this one unharmed. Cleanup and repairs take us through the night, which see our Itakin prisoner go berserk once more, but for temperature reasons he is currently sharing his cell with Ghoul J, and so his uprising is very short-lived. On the next morning then it's time to perhaps once again manipulate the forces of this world against each other. The first step towards that goal is to build a secondary ritual spot that does not profit from any ritual quality bonuses, and then we'll have Mechanitor Lauren perform a Draw Animals ritual. This here the worst possible quality that we can currently achieve, and that is very much by design as we're hoping to attract some manhunters. While we do, we also finished the research of growth vats, so we may have new children coming our way soon. So up next, let's focus on improving what, or rather who, we already have, with what could very well be the most transhumanist research project possible, bionic replacements. Lauren's Draw Animals ritual then comes to a, at least from our perspective, successful end, and that also means that it's time for part 2 of the plan, calling in another Diabolus. Every time we repeat this, the number and strength of the mechanoids summoned will increase. This way we can hopefully get them to fight a group of man-hunting animals first, which should make the whole affair a tiny bit easier for us. And well, considering that the man-hunting animals are polar bears, it might actually make things a lot easier. So let us see then how this goes. Now, unfortunately, the mechanoids land on the opposite side of our base, so we might have to finesse this a bit for the two groups to actually meet. Luckily, we have Volek and his long jump ability, which, as you can see, did not save him from getting battered by one of the bears, but it does draw their attention at least a tiny bit further to the north, while also pulling the mechs a bit closer. Still, the whole setup here is far from ideal, as we unfortunately did not manage to lure the entire group of polar bears over to the mechs, so even though the Diabolus does a good job taking out some of its allies here, we are going to summon some additional help at this point. And we're going to do so in the form of a Draw Fleshbeasts ritual. This thing can actually have up to 6 chanters, and we end up with a ritual quality of 89%. That should hopefully end up in a sizable group of them. The polar bears, meanwhile, not really the help I had hoped they would be. They're just getting themselves slaughtered here, one after another. I had hoped that with the two groups getting closer to each other that we would see a bit more of a melee, but the way this is currently going, they really don't stand much of a chance. So, good thing I guess that we spent the 50 bioferrite to summon some Fleshbeasts, who are now in fact emerging pretty much right underneath the mechanoids. Let's hope that they can do slightly more significant damage. In the middle of what at least starts to look promising here, we then also finish the study of the philophagy ritual, so we can now improve our own skills with those of others, something that we will try very soon, I think, although for the moment we'll focus all of our research efforts on the bliss lobotomy. Otherwise, with most of our entities already being of the advanced kind, this could take quite a while to finish. Now, as you can see, we may have timed the arrival of the Fleshbeasts just a tad bit too early, because while some of them are fighting the mechs, at least half of them are also engaging the polar bears, and the Diabolus' fire blast here is probably the worst thing that could happen to them, because as with most entities in the Anomaly DLC, they do not like fire one bit. In addition, their attacks also don't really seem to bother the Diabolus all that much, and because I think that it might now be just a little too late to also summon some Shamblers, we might just have to get involved ourselves. Now, at least the two pikemen that are also still roaming around do not present too much of a threat. Our ghouls are a very useful tool in luring them in. Let's see if that same approach also works against the Diabolus. The idea here is to lock it into melee combat and to force it to shoot its main cannon somewhere far away from our colonists, and well, for the most part that seems to be working. So let's send in the reinforcements now and hope that we have enough firepower to take the Diabolus down before it can fire a second time. Alright, and there we go. With combined efforts we have taken down another Diabolus, and once again only Ghoul Midnight takes some damage. At this point we then only need to swiftly take care of the last pikeman here before it destroys our gene extractor. But that is quickly accomplished, and with that the fight is over. A bit of a mess here, and perhaps not entirely necessary, considering that most of this was done just so we could acquire a bit more steel. For my tastes, our current supply is just not growing fast enough. And considering that we do have one more drop pod expedition planned today, it might be sensible to increase our stockpile a bit before we embark, because of course we also need materials for the return trip. Nazim then suffers a dark visions mental break. Ironically enough, the reason for it was actually Elpis's uninspiring leader speech, a bit of a harsh punishment if you ask me, but I suppose it gives Elpis another reason to quickly improve his leadership skills. Back in action then, after being resurrected, Gnome the Scyther, who will actually accompany us on our upcoming expedition very shortly. Before we send out our pods, however, let's quickly fill in those holes that the Fleshbeasts crawled out of. It just seems a bit sketchy leaving them open like this. At night then, Volek experiences a shoot frenzy, and that's actually quite fitting, because on the next morning he joins Mechanitor Lauren and Scyther Gnome in a transport pod. Also added are the materials needed for the return trip, including steel, as the place we are attacking will most likely not have any. At this point we also learn that we only have 2 days left until we definitely need to get rid of the Nociosphere, but I suppose that'll be something for the next episode. For now we are ready for takeoff, and this here is our target destination, the bandit camp. And for a change, we'll actually drop right into their midst. They are only tribals, and we have a Scyther and an unkillable vampire with us, so this should hopefully work out. The reason we're here, by the way, is because we are on quest business. Successfully clearing the camp will, among other things, reward us with a skill trainer for the animal skill. And to start off the fight, Scyther Gnome doing exactly what I had hoped would happen, drawing most of the enemy attention and swiftly killing off the rather unprotected tribals. Their bows are already not the best weapon against the Scyther, their fists obviously even less so. Nonetheless, even if Gnome were to go down here, that would not be too much of a problem, I think. After all, this is very much a renewable source of combat power. And there we go, the tribals are fleeing and we earn a grand total of 3 ideology development points. In that regard, the radar ideology is definitely very powerful, and our colonists also all gain a +6 mood bonus, even those who remained at home. Now, I had hoped that we would be able to take a prisoner here, but alas, it seems like we're just too good at killing people. In which case, let us at least take some resources. After all, out on the sea ice, wood is hard to come by, so we are swiftly deconstructing the enemy shelter here and then also have a trade ship pass by. We'll take care of them in due time. For now, let's load up our transport pod for the trip back home. Volek and Gnome are the first ones to leave, together with a few valuables, and a few hours later it is then Lauren's turn, who still has plenty of room in her pod to bring back over 400 pemmican, some uranium and over 100 wood. Unfortunately though, as she loads up the pod, she also gets sick with the flu. Good thing that she will be in the hands of our capable doctors very soon. To end the episode then, we give birth to our very first Muffalo calf, which will now be named Dot, after the Patreon supporter of the same name. A few moments later then, Lauren and her haul from the bandit camp arrive back home, and as you can see, she receives medical attention almost immediately. Which then leaves us with only one thing to do for today, and that is to use the recently acquired animal skill trainer on Nightshade. This will increase her skill level from 7 to a rather respectable 12, enough so that in theory she is now able to tame polar bears, megasloths and even thrumbos. And with that, I think we have reached a good point to wrap up today's rather eventful episode. The anomaly was back today and in full force, and should the void provocation ritual indeed be working again, then I think we will continue down that path in the next episode. In that one we will then also take care of that trader, but first of all let's transition over to some fan art. with a lovely piece from Gracie, who also made the Live, Love, Provoke the Void design, and whose work you can follow over on Tumblr. I've left a link on screen. Also, we've got another lovely piece by Tony Murchison, depicting that moment when Elpis deactivated the cube, causing Maniac to rage so intensely that he broke out of the gene extractor. And with that, let's make the cut for today. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. Also, if you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.